Hello, everyone. This is Melissa Vela-Williamson, host of the Smart Talk series. We have a special treat for you today, a bonus episode featuring my conversation with guest host and PR thought leader, Gini Dietrich. Enjoy the Smart Talk session and stay tuned for our next season coming fall 2023.
Welcome to the Smart Talk series, the show for professionals who want strategies, tips, and real talk about all things PR, marketing, and social media. Your host is Melissa Vela-Williamson, an award-winning, accredited, and nationally recognized PR pro and communication thought leader. And now your host, Melissa Vela-Williamson.
All right, let's get started. So we are actually turning the tables on this Smart Talk series. I'm clearly not your normal host. You've probably figured that out. I'm Gini Dietrich, and I'm sitting in today because I wanted to turn the tables and talk to Melissa about inclusive communications. And the idea for this webinar came from having a conversation that Melissa and I were having after she attended the most recent PRSA conference. And people said some pretty surprising and stupid things to her, everything from speaking to her in Spanish, even though they weren't native Spanish speakers and Melissa was speaking in English, to asking her which native tribe she's from. And, I think the thing is that we expect so much better from people in 2023, especially communicators. This is an area where we can all excel and take a real leadership position. But it means that we have to dig deep inside ourselves and remove some of the biases that we have. We all have them, right? And we have to remove them. So we're going to talk more about that today. But without further ado, here is your normal host and today's guest, Melissa Vela-Williamson.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And thank you so much, Gini, for all your encouragement and your support and being a part of this session today. No one is like you in this industry, and we are so excited to hear from you and hear your thoughts on this as well. But as you mentioned, I was pretty surprised. So I love PRSA, the Public Relations Society of America, because I was that student who was the first in the family to go to college. So I didn't know what I was doing from the beginning.
Right.
And I found PR my last semester. So I learned it on the ground and a lot through PRSA and the mentors I met there and the education they have and the opportunities they have. So with that context, I will say I was very excited to go to the international conference this past year. It was in Texas, so much more accessible for me. And I was able to bring the book, and I, applied to speak at the student, the PR SSA track, and the pros track. And they had different tailored topics, right? We should tailor for our audiences.
Sure.
But they're both about content in the book and what I thought might resonate with each audience group. And what was very telling, Gini, right away was it seemed like the students or younger pros or pros of color were very accepting of me as an author. And believe me, identity is multifaceted, and putting on that author piece has been new for me and something I've really had to push myself to identify with, because it seems so grand and big. But for me, I had stories to share and experiences and how-tos, and that part was easy. But adding that onto the identity has been harder. And that feeling was kind of validated by that conference experience. Even after I spoke to a full room, there was just these little inequities that didn't feel right. Like I didn't have AV support to get ready. And I had people lined up against the wall to hear me speak, but I'm micing myself in my blouse. And,
right.
You're like, well, I can't think that that's about race or being a woman, or I don't want to think that way. Right. But there was just weird comments and I find weird from my PR pros. Those who had been practicing longer, who owned agencies, who were a leader in their departments, and tend to be older and tend to be white, our white counterparts would make these comments to me, and we'd be speaking in English and then be like, "Felicidades!" And it just felt off. Just like that moment felt off to everyone, probably. That felt off. And so that's what I was really working through and working with, or I'd be asked about Spanish a lot. And from my Latino peers, absolutely that makes a ton of sense, right? And we talked about our histories and whatnot and why my family lost Spanish language, because it was shameful to speak it in the generations my parent grew up. So you had discrimination back then. And then it was, okay, learn English well, which I did, English majors, right? But then somewhere it shifted. And I want to say it was Jennifer Lopez, because I remember when the Selena movie came out and J-Lo got big and it was like, yes, be Latina. Okay. But all of us are fighting, I think, Jeannie, like a caricature of what we're supposed to be in terms of what Hollywood presents. And then maybe
Listen, if I could look like Jennifer Lopez, I'm all in. Like, let's do it.
Right. So, it is really, really interesting dynamic, but I just kept getting these comments that made me think, Jeannie, like, you're making comments about my age, whether you think I look old enough or don't, about my height. I'm 5'1", but what the heck does that matter? Like,
right.
This is all brain work, right?
Right.
It made me feel like if I was in a different package, if I was a man, if I look more like my husband, a Caucasian, blonde hair, blue-eyed man, if I was a different type of pro, would you make that comment? And that's what I want us to talk about today is be more conscious of what we're saying and how we're communicating, even if we think we know it all there, because things have changed, people have changed, we're continuing to evolve, and communicators must be on the forefront of that.
Yeah, I think for sure that we have to be leaders in this. And, when you're at PRSA, which is a conference for communicators, and it's full of communicators, I almost expect us to behave better and differently. And certainly we will all make mistakes, right? I've made mistakes. There are lots of mistakes that I have made that I've learned from in this area. So that I'm not saying that we are without reproach, but I think we have to be better. And those kinds of things, I mean, like you doing your own AV, when you shared that story with me, it was very clear that some of the other speakers had hosts in the room to help them, and you did not. And so you have to wonder, is it a race or woman thing? Is it you're brand new to the speaking circuit and not experienced enough? Like, you don't know, right? But it is strange that the more experienced, well-known speakers had hosts and you did not.
Right. And again, like, I want to be careful because I want to give grace, just like you're saying, Jeannie, to everyone. And they were getting their feet back under them after not being in person for a while. I get it. But you were right. I had panelists come up to me and say, how did it go? My God, your room was packed. I saw on the app, it was going crazy. I'm like, yeah. And it felt really dissonant that everyone saw that experience about the topic of DEI and cultural infusion with the PR. So that's what we wanted to share, is that it's the little things that we need to make a more conscious effort of, like making sure someone, particularly if you don't often have a person of color come speak to your group, or they're not on the panel, or they don't do the podcast interviews, are they set up and supported as much, or maybe a little bit more if they need it, right, as another guest?
Because they don't have experience. Yes.
Right, because we don't want any of our stakeholders thinking, what was that about? And while that answer may not ever be given to me, it was a teaching moment for everyone in the room. It was a teaching moment for me. And it just kind of verified some of the feelings I was working through, that I have to be able to support myself and advocate for myself. And that's something that resonates when I speak about it, particularly with people who come from backgrounds that are a little disenfranchised or disadvantaged. And a lot of us are in different situations that's true for us. But we just wanted to think about that when we have the power to shape those experiences.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that leads to, many of us are on DEI committees at work, or we're advising companies on how they handle their diversity challenges. So let's talk about some of the things that communicators should do when advising committee members and senior leaders about DEI.
Yeah, and it is, and I will say that it's a tricky situation for a communicator, especially if that's not what your focus is. Mm-hmm. So we've talked about it for a long time, and PRSA even identifies like 13 different disciplines that are specialties under this PR umbrella. And I will say, and I'm trying to make a case for cultural strategy or DEI work integration to be a new specialty, because it's about serving others well and making those relationships. But we're not all there yet. So I would firstly tell anyone in that position, when you're working with committee members or senior leaders about DEIs, share your point of view. Like, unless you are a DEI consultant or a certified diversity professional, you can share that you're not that type of professional yet. Yes. But as a communicator, you're really invested in supporting these efforts. So our PR perspective or our communication perspective on DEI is going to be different than a human resources or HR perspective. And that needs to be made clear, I think, in the very beginning, because HR and how they really think about their point of view on DEI is quite different, right? There's EEOC, there's legal things. That's a space that I don't specialize in. But we are talking about, hey, how do we wade into these waters that can be polarizing, that can be very uncomfortable, and can be done wrong pretty easily, right? So I like to talk to PR pros and the community like this about, let's consider first getting good at understanding what culture is and what it's not, how we appreciate culture and not appropriate it, right? Are we giving respect? Are we sharing the stage with people from that community? Are we inviting them into planning and the actual, like, it's Black History Month, right? If you have a committee putting together Black History Month celebration and there's not someone from the Black community a part of it, right?
Hello.
Start there. But you'd probably be surprised, or maybe not, that that's happening, right? So you want to make sure that you are not characterizing any type of people. And so that's planning with a group and with experts when you can. But understanding culture makes up a lot of things, right? So it's the preferences we have as a group on music and the language we use, or religious practices we do, food, of course, and we can unite through that cultural experience. And that leads to the values. Like, what do we care about as humans? And when we think beyond like the demographics, like so-and-so's this age and makes about this money, and that's really in some ways can lead to stereotyping.
Absolutely.
Right? I've heard even in the simplest cases where, do you remember when there was that transition from just the cell phone, like, wow, you have a cell phone, to a smartphone? And I heard for-profit corporations saying, well, low-income customers don't have, they're not going to have these kind of phones. And you pull the research, is like they absolutely do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What they don't have in the digital divide is the Wi-Fi and the desktop computer, but they're going to have that phone because that makes sense in answering a lot of the challenges they have.
Well, we even found that during the pandemic, where students were challenged because they were having to do remote learning, and the only way they could get on the internet was on their phone. And so trying to figure that piece of it out. So for sure.
And the phone became a part of popular culture. And so that's always a great way to wade into this, right? Pop culture, that transcends a lot of the barriers we have as groups or the boundaries we have. So the type of music that's really popular right now, maybe not right now because we're so niche now, right? But look at all the 90s stuff that's kicked back. Like, your daughter has a Tamagotchi, and I about lost it when I said that was pop culture back then, and it's reinventing itself into our culture now. So yeah, we can unify and unite on looking for what are the commonalities. So let's start there as a communication group, and we're working with these committees. But then research, right? Number 2 is like, do your research and advise others to do theirs too. Before you write something that's sensitive, before you use a term that you're not sure is still accurate today. In this work, you may not make everyone happy, but it's really important to try to make the majority of people happy. By and large, the research I've done shows, like, just in the US, for example, the majority of Americans, although we see a lot about the polarization and it's divided and blah, 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 most of us live somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And kind of are ruled by, well, it depends. Like you and Chip Griffin say a lot. It depends. And it's case by case. So do your research on that. And some great resources are Pew Research Center, nonpartisan think tank, like, go get data, right? You may think that this is the right way to say it, or what kind of stakeholders really purchase this item. They have a great amount of data there. And then, of course, the Institute for Public Relations Center for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion has a lot of great webinars and tools and tips and data there. Some of it's really unique into communication. And then PRSA has their D&I toolkit as well. So you want to research before you actually say or do something. And then you want to look to encourage and invite that collaboration, particularly from diverse voices and sources and stakeholders. So it's just looking through the room, and who's at this planning committee? Does this represent the target stakeholder we have for this campaign? Do we need to invite someone else to get their input and ask them and actually test before we do?
It's like Sally says in the chat, that's up there with having an all-male panel on women in the military.
Oh gosh, or all marketing panel on something that we've seen some advertising, campaigns where, like, was there not a PR person on that one?
Right.
Or was there not a woman? Was there not someone from that community?
Yep.
So exactly.
I actually just saw an ad for scrubs, that doctors and nurses wear. And I saw it here in Chicago. The thing about ad copy that's written by people who don't live in the city is they always try to glom onto something they think is popular. And they were like, deep dish pizza and scrubs go together. And I'm like, nobody here likes deep dish pizza. Everybody thinks we do and we don't.
What? Well, let me just hold on. My horse is neighing at me. Let me go get my horse because I'm in Texas, Gina.
Right.
We all ride horses all day long.
Right.
Or, it's the same thing, right? Oh, you're Latina, you must speak Spanish, right? And
Well, sure, you experienced that at PRSA, yeah.
And everywhere. I'll be fair, I get that everywhere. And again, we all are fighting for our enoughness, and let's us do better. So,
okay, so let's talk about the types of tactics that we should include in our communications programs around DEI.
Yeah, well, I'll get it. I mean, really, first working with, if you can, an experienced, and I'll underline and highlight experienced because I just like PR and communication. There are people who say, oh, I can do that. Maybe they're born of a certain culture or group or had a certain experience, and all the love to them. But you want to be careful before you advise your company or your client or organization or agency. So you're looking for someone who has experience in working in the space. And if they're certified, even better, kind of like public relations. But you're definitely wanting to do that kind of audit, just like you would do a communication audit and say, like, what is our communication like? There's a lot of what we would call in industry low-hanging fruit. Are there people missing in the visuals? One of the very first campaigns I did as a very young PR pup was what I called the Everyday Hero campaign. And it was for Big Brothers Big Sisters here in South Texas. What I found was when I would look through the photo library, like there was no people that looked like us. And we really needed more minority Big Brothers. And we just didn't have the image that would actually show that we worked with them. Nor would we have anything that would actually make them think that they're a fit here or resonate or attract them. And so I said, well, can we do our own photo shoot, our own video shoot? I want to represent all the different types of Big Brother, Big Sisters we have here, and even big couples who are married couples who mentor. So that's a great example of, look around, like do that audit. Like, do we actually show and illustrate the type of people we work with and those who can serve here or those who work here or those who lead here? If you see the disparity or the holes, work to fix them. Right?
Yeah.
We have the power to help really inspire good action operationally inside of organizations. So I would say, I'm seeing that this might be an issue. But then with our other kind of tactics is like thinking about the way we even communicate in terms of writing. One easy fix that I have for people is like thinking right away, don't speak in absolutes. So if you've ever heard someone say, we never do this, or we always, or
Great. Yep. Really good advice.
Right. And PR, we know that sometimes maybe most people, many people, not all, right? Often it's not all. So just being careful with terms like that, making sure that you're using terms that represent particularly a cultural group or ethnic group very carefully, and they're using the most preferred term. So we even take the term that represents someone like me, where I have two that I come to mind right away, or three. Hispanic, right? So I do have family origins from Mexico. I'm born in the US, so was my mother. My grandfather came over here. A lot of us have that immigrant, right? A lot of us are not native to the US, if you go down that path. But looking at that, okay, Hispanic, or I could be Latina, or I could be Latino, or Latinx. So that's Latin, Latin with the X, which is supposed to be like a non-gendered, gender-neutral term.
Sure.
And then a lot of people started grabbing that term and saying, okay, that's got to be the most inclusive term. Well, they did research on it. Pew did. And a lot of people really hate that term or had never heard about it. About 3% of Americans show that they actually use it and accept it. So there's things that, you want to make sure that this is actually an accepted practice before you start using it and working in that space too. Other tactics really is that if you want to express appreciation for groups during cultural months, is that you're doing the research to have the history of how that month came about, what its proper name is. Some are history, some are heritage, right? And then are you really highlighting all the groups that you possibly can and working with the internal resources you might have, like the D&I department. Again, sometimes departments are siloed and they don't work together. And they're all charged with supporting diversity and inclusion, but they're actually not working with the in-house resource for that. Or you might have affinity groups, or you might have diversity councils that you can work with. And then, of course, there's plenty of nonprofits that you can give money to that actually do this on the ground work that you can highlight in your communication pieces and pass the mic to them that way. And that they can come and speak to your organization and put on a great program or experience that really is more cultural appreciation. And it serves to help highlight probably an unsung hero or group.
So one of the things I think is important for us to remember as well is that this continues to evolve. So some of the things that, as from a business perspective, we deem okay right now, my nieces and nephews who are in high school are like, no, you can't say that. So as they come into the business world in the next 5 or 6 years, right, they're going to change all of that. So it's like, this is something that continues to evolve, and we have to remember that we have to continue to dig deep and release our biases and learn. I think that's the most important thing, is learn.
Yeah, I think that's what I was feeling some resistance to from the more established pros when we were speaking in person.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that maybe to some
Sure.
of them, I did look young or look different, or because I was shorter, I felt small and cute. Let me grab you. And that's, hey, I can work with that sometimes, right? But I think it was that feeling of, I already know this, right? In fact, my sweet husband was supporting me during the conference. And so he was down at a different area while I was speaking and selling the book and just supporting all this cause of really sharing more information for young aspiring or transitioning journalists that want to come to PR, all the info they need. But then more importantly, for practicing pros, this chapter on tailoring for multicultural audiences, he's there. There's a big vertical banner with my big face on it, which was strategic so that people would know, oh, this was written by a different type of PR pro, without saying she's Hispanic, right? With a little asterisk on my, on my book. And they looked at him, and this person looks at him, looks at the banner, looks at the book, like, did you write this book? And the next comment was, no, that was my wife. And he says she's been in the business for 20 years and it's her decades of experience on the ground. So other people like her can know how it works, really. And this person says, well, I've been in the business for 40 years, but I'm like, we don't have to compete. Everybody, there's enough business for all of us, but all of just little comments like that, they would be deemed as microaggressions, but a lot of it is unintended, maybe slights, right? That we need to work through. And like you said, with bias, I like to walk into bias pretty carefully too, because really bias is, again, goes down to preference. A bias is a preference. And truly, we want to make sure to understand the differences between those that are implicit, that really underneath the surface are unconscious, that we didn't realize we were doing, and those that are pretty explicit that we can change right away in our work.
Yeah. And, Linda says in the chat, we're never too experienced to learn something, especially when it's coming from a person who's closer to the knowledge, which totally 100% agree with.
Yeah. And the one-upping or the name dropping. And it's like, again, to your point, we have to be critical thinkers for our clients, but for ourselves first, because we have to present that role model.
Right. Absolutely. So Carrie Porter wrote a really interesting article for us to consider in this area, and we'll link to it in the show notes so that you have it. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting is the idea of intersectionality, which is the fact that it's not just about race and gender, which we talk about all the time, right? We talk about men versus women, and we talk about bringing in different races and different cultures, but it's also about class and sexuality too. And you mentioned some of that at the beginning with the smartphone, right? Everyone assumed that lower class or disadvantaged people wouldn't have a smartphone, but they do. So we have to think about class, and we have to think about sexuality too. So talk a little bit about what we can include in our comms plans so that we have the intersectionality in everything that we do.
Yeah. And I will first jump on that word intersectionality. I definitely feel like, and I worked in a D&I department proper for 4 years inside of a corporation. I was able to use my PR point of view there because we were actually uniquely tied to the public affairs house versus the HR house in that private company. And so for me, I learned very quickly, if we as communicators can make some of these words that are a little awkward to say, pretty big mouthfuls, hard to even spell sometimes.
Intersectionality.
Intersectionality or even privilege. I've been hearing from communicators, that it's kind of a hot word. It makes people feel defensive.
Interesting.
Can we look for words that will help define? It's like when we're in school, right? Reading those paragraphs, we're like, I don't know what that word is, but the rest of the context helps me understand. So for intersectionality, see, I would say like,
I practiced it, by the way.
I know.
Otherwise, I would have stumbled too.
Well, as people, we identify with multiple aspects and roles that we play each and every day. So me, I'm a woman, I'm a PR professional, I'm a mother, dog mom, daughter, some people say, sister, a neighbor, a good neighbor to some, right? First generation college student, second generation, like the list goes on for all of us. And the idea of intersectionality is that these pieces can connect or overlap or intersect, right? To make a mosaic type of picture or identity we have of ourselves. What's really important to remember, it's what people see in themselves first, which means we do have to do more work than if it was easy and groups were monolithic and people were one-dimensional, because they're not.
Right.
None of us are. And each day, one part of our identity is going to be a little more important to us than others. I talked about in the beginning about this author piece, right? And how clunky that felt for me right now, but growing into it. And so sometimes people or communicators, it's just easier to relate to or communicate to one aspect of someone's identity. And often, probably in the most like simple and unfortunate terms, they're going after race or they're going after ethnicity or they're going after gender. They're not thinking, that might be a little bit limiting, right? Or maybe it feels patronizing or insensitive.
Right.
And sometimes that's what I would say is unintentional, but this is 2023. So I think by now, after all the years we've been through, if you're not woke enough to see, like, I might need to think a little deeper about what we do as communicators, like, you definitely need to catch up. So this is about really thinking of that conscious effort to consider people's identities and how personal they are and which part of the picture you want to resonate with your communication piece. So it really goes down to tailoring for your audience. Like, who are you trying to connect with here? And what is a good way to find that connection point? Is it going to be about, for example, the top value that people have around the world based on research David Allison's done around values, and his value graphics project is really about belonging and togetherness. Everybody, every human around the world, he has a ton of data to support this, really care about belonging somewhere to some group.
Right.
It makes a ton of sense, right? So is there a way that campaign about, for example, being a big brother could be more about belonging to something? When we did the data on who were the bigs, right, or who were good volunteers, if they were a little bit younger, maybe college age, we found that they were coming into the city from another area and miss family and miss connections and were building their own community, right?
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's not always about race. It's not always about class. It's about people's love for food or status, or maybe it's about belonging to a group. Are you team iPhone or are you team Android? So, team Edward, do y'all remember that?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, look at the M&Ms. People are picking sides because they want to belong to something. So can you use that in a positive way in your work?
I love that. Do you have 3 to 5 habits that communicators should employ when building more inclusive communications?
Yes, I sure do. I would say first, kudos to all of you who are making time for this conversation today, because it shows that you're hitting number 1, which for me is just really understanding that today's world is different. If you're in the US, America is quite different than ever before, right? For the first time. Yeah. And our census reporting, and there was underreporting. We are more multicultural, multiracial than ever, which means those identities are more intersected or complex than before. That's a positive sign. That means we're getting along better. We're falling in love more. That's awesome. But that also means you can't put people in a quick little box, right, the way you may have before years ago. And like I used the term minority before, like it depends on your market. There can be a lot of people that feel like the term minority is unfair to use. And so I've been actually trying to work that out of my vernacular. But sometimes it's like, well, we're just talking about the number of people in a group. So let's see what might be a better word, right? And you have to consciously work through that because the term minority it's not representative of Texas anymore.
Right.
Right. So we're exactly equal, like the Hispanics are exactly equal, the Hispanic population with, or Latino population with the white population in Texas. Okay. Well, what's a new term for that? So we want to be actually looking at these reports and data and all the news articles that came out about that and just stop and think, does that change anything for us? Does that change anything for me? Like, does that change anything for who we work with, right? We actually haven't put together a campaign that really specifically targeted the Hispanic community, but now they're exactly 50% of the market. That's a lot of numbers, right? And it just projected to continue to grow in that space. So understanding that we're more multicultural and multifaceted than ever, and becoming more culturally aware because of that, for sure, of who you're working with, who you're working for, and tailor your communication approach for those audiences. So is our language, our images, and our music and our video, does that resonate these groups' preferred preferences, right? Their values and what they like to eat and drink. Like you said, don't talk to me about deep dish pizza. That's not right?
I know everybody likes to come here for that, but nobody who lives here eats it.
Yeah. And as pros, I will say, because the next one I have is really represent better, right? So removing outdated terms and images and whatnot, and who you serve in your visuals on panels, in leadership roles, in writing, video, whatever you can champion, go for it. But I would also say, like, don't perpetuate things that are disrespectful as well. I saw a colleague that has been in the business a long time, and I will not name names because I like to keep my bridges open.
Sure.
But that colleague was celebrating a young person's birthday in a very old-fashioned sombrero, Mexican mustache way that I'm like, ouch, you live in this community. Like, and you're not, So the way that felt, it's exactly how it felt. So you're looking for those moments and you're reading for them. You're watching them on social. You're having those moments yourself and you're like, oh, that could be something I make sure we don't do anymore. Right.
Yeah.
And then treating others with respect and sensitivity. We want to think before you speak. Like, I'm sure a lot of the comments I got were just little flip comments that people made, not even thinking. Why not? We're at a professional conference. Most of the time I'm representing the industry. It's a professional space. So act like you're on stage, like we would tell a client. If you wouldn't say it with a microphone in the hand, don't say it person to person.
That's great.
That could be helpful.
Yep. That's really good advice.
Yeah. And when you write and how you act, you have to walk that same walk for sure. And then when you have that privilege, or another word for that is like advantage or leverage, like use it to help others, pass the mic and say, you know what, we haven't had this diverse professional in this opportunity before, that we're missing these type of people on the board. Can we make a conscious effort to be uncomfortable, admit that, and go after it?
Absolutely. If you are in the SpinSlex community, you already know this, but I'm working on some content around how leaders think that they're great communicators. And I think we all experience this. So like, my wife was in marketing 20 years ago before we had kids, and she wants to help out on this campaign because her kids are gone. Or anyone can write. You don't need to write that. I'll write it for us. Those kinds of things happen all the time. And there's this new research that shows that 85% of leaders think that they're great communicators, when in all actuality, only 10% are. And I think that leads to, if leaders think that they're great communicators and great writers, do they also think that they're really open to diversity, equality, and inclusion? And I guess what I want to know from you is, how do we know? Certainly as we start to dig into the work with our clients or with our executives, we will figure it out. But how do we know going into those conversations as we're starting to prepare and we're doing the research? How will we know how open they're going to be and how to get them from one path to the next?
Right. I think an easy way is sharing a story or a case study, something you just read or heard or experienced, and reading the room for that reaction from that leader. Do they cross their arms? Or their nonverbals giving you that feeling like they're upset maybe in the positive way, that they feel like that was wrong? Or are they like, well, that's silly, you're too sensitive, right? Or women are too sensitive, or you can't ever do anything right by this group or that group. Like, so you're listening for what they actually say, but also watching how they do.
That's great. Yep.
And I would test it a couple times to see what is that reaction like. But as they say, proof is in the pudding. So a lot of times your internal point of contact, who may be under that CEO or supervisor, they know. You can literally ask like, hey, are they really open to doing a little more progressive communication work? Can we try some more inclusive communications? I've noticed you haven't featured any people with disabilities, and you have a lot of services and programs that could benefit them if they were just tailored a certain kind of way, and seeing what that reaction's like, right? And then also I would say, like, I look for people who are asking us for questions, asking us questions about these topics, or mentioning these things, or
great point.
Or they're using that information that you do share with them, and they're modifying their behaviors or their communication right away. Because people, especially in this space, like, we don't want to just talk about the same things and have the same conversations over and over. We want that progression, and we want to see leaders in particular take action, or at least support from that top down. Hey, we'll invest in this. Like, here are the resources. You have the time, you have the money to do this work yourself, or to hire a consultant, or get the training, get that certification. Let's create some new policies. How about new materials? Yeah. When you can see that investment from them and that sharing, you'll know that they're open to change. So I would say toast those waters often. And if you're an agency and you're taking on new clients, it's the kind of reaction you might have. A diversity audit doesn't have to be special. When you do a communication audit and you onboard a new client and you look at their marketing materials or the PR materials, just look at the images. Does it feel like your market or their market? Is this outdated? Does it even just need a refresh because these people are still wearing clothes like from the 70s and whatever? So it's a lot about just, the testing and iteration. And is there that openness for those kind of conversations? And then is there a conversion into some kind of action?
We have a former client, and you'll understand why former in just a minute, but the CEO posted a picture after an executive team meeting and talked about how wonderful the team is. And he was, all this flowery language and how excited they were to be planning and going forth into the new year. This was a couple of years ago. And the photo was all white men. And I was like, you guys, this is not representative, of your employee base at all, because the employee base is extremely diverse. But all they had in the room for the executive leadership meeting and the planning were white men. That's it.
Right.
That's it. So even stuff like that will help you understand, right? Because he thought that was the best thing ever. And I was like, you are not representing your employee or your customer base at all.
Yeah. And don't get us wrong. You will still get some comments. Again, you can't make everyone happy in general, but especially in doing some of this work. I'm looking for that more common ground, non-polarizing grace and kind of heart-centered work as communicators. I think that's the efforts we should focus on, because it can be very tricky very quickly. But I will say I had a client that posted a very diverse looking image and talking about, it was a thank you employee appreciation day or month experience. And some, random person just posted, it's not very diverse there and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, like the photo didn't validate your comment at all. So they're still trolls. And
sure.
Believe me, they like to look for this kind of conversation too. But yeah, you can take a look and say, this image does not go well with this copy.
Does not work. Right. At all.
And it could be totally unconscious, like these are the people who gathered. Well, yeah. And so like the bigger question or the deeper question is, can we work on that?
How do we change
organization?
That? Yep.
Right.
Yep.
But hey, every step forward is good, I think.
So Linda asked, can we ask something like, how are you leading your organization in the realm of DEI? Is that too bold, or does that work?
I don't think it's too bold, especially for, bigger, badder for-profits, right? You can ask every organization, if this is something that is true to your heart and you're ready to work in, go for it. Just expect that face. Because it just puts people a little bit on the defensive because they're not sure what they're doing.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I try
It's
to,
uncomfortable.
right. So I try to use the terms more like, hey, inclusive communication, where it's like, okay, that feels a little safe. What are we talking about here? And then defining it like, we want to make sure we're representing all the types of customers you serve. Oh, well, yeah, that's really important, right? Because they're thinking sales, right? Or service, which is great. So I would say read the room, Linda, like everything else, and try to find the right word that will open up that conversation.
So one more question I have for you, and then we'll open it up for questions. What's one takeaway? Like if we leave here today, what's one thing that we could employ by tomorrow morning?
So I would just say that really understanding that we should tailor our communication for the different types of people we want to connect with is the big takeaway. And that is, to me, the entry point into this DEI integrating with PR work and specialty that I think it will become over time, because people are just not getting there yet. So we really have the power as communicators to change things. We can bring groups together, or we can divide them up pretty easily with just the words we write. And we can work through how our society kind of evolves and hopefully be on the forefront of that. I think as we evolve our communication with it. There are some in DEI, Gini, that I think some of the terms they use, again, we talked about some of them that being a little clunky to work with, but it can be so advanced. Just like even if you talk about PR with someone from academia, look for that common way. How might a layperson understand this? Think about educational diversity. Does this resonate with all types of people if they have a college degree or not? So it can be very simple. I think it's just more of that thinking critically through our audiences and trying to adjust terms, visuals, music, whenever we can to fit better.
And bring in J-Lo because she helps.
I mean, you don't need J-Lo. I'm right here.
I want to leave you with one thing before we go to questions. Yeah. And that is, a couple of times you've brought up fitting into the new identity of being an author. And when my first book was published, I remember I was getting my hair cut, and he was, he's cutting my hair, and we're having this whole conversation about my book was just published and I'm going on tour and everything. And he goes, "Why are you not telling everybody about it?" And I was like, I don't know. Like, everybody writes a book. And he stops cutting. He puts his scissors down. He comes around to the other side of the chair and he looks at me and he says, "Maybe in your world, everybody writes books, but in the real world, nobody does. So I want you to climb to the top of this building and yell it to everyone." And I was like, okay. So I relay that to you too, because it's a really big deal. And I understand that it's hard to sort of add certain new things into your identity, but you're an author, you're a published author. A publisher thought your content was good enough to take you under their wing and publish the content. So keep that in mind, because I know that, especially as women, we struggle with these kinds of things, but you're an author, you're a published author. That's a big deal. Out in the real world, it doesn't happen to everyone.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to take that in. I'm owning it, and I think that's what has been very, very relatable to a lot of people, especially the women of color I've spoken to, especially the students. They're just like so starry-eyed and looking for someone like them. And I don't know if I can do this work, or
that's exactly right. That's exactly
every day in PR. I mean, I'm sure y'all have your moments where you're like, I can't do this. I don't know the answer to that. I can't believe this situation just happened. And we have to work through that. And so, I would say you hear imposter syndrome a lot. I don't think it's that. I think there's a complexity to what women are told they can and can't do, and, how we can and can't behave, as well as like people of color, as well as my own family experience. So again, it goes back to the complexity we all have as individuals. And I think sharing that vulnerability, what we're working through and working on, is very helpful, because then people go, I resonate with that, right? So if any of y'all have ever experienced that feeling of, I'm not sure I can do this work, or I'm fit for this, or, I'm being told I'm excellent, you're just not owning that, what they would say is crown, I guess. It's very universal. And men experience it too. And that's another part of D&I is like, our male colleagues and men experience a lot of the same things we do, and don't get the opportunity to fully communicate that without shame. So I'm so excited we're doing this work, because communication makes us understand how we should feel or not feel about something.
That's right.
Yeah, great.
All right. So we have a couple of really good questions. As someone who's not in a disadvantaged minority group, how can I support diversity and inclusion efforts and impact?
So that is all about allyship. That is all about understanding. I just heard this great podcast the other day I shared on Twitter about tangible equity in education. And he was really talking about this idea of privilege too. And it's like, it's just something you have that maybe you didn't earn. For example, like if you're born in the US, you're going to have certain privileges than those who are not, right? We hear about that all the time.
Yep.
So when you have that opportunity to help a disadvantaged group or person or someone who, gosh, is just because of a lot of factors we can't control, may be behind and has that potential to really run on up next to you, like support them, right? Be that mentor, donate if you can, offer them opportunities to be an intern, an apprentice, pay them, interns. Oh my gosh. We are, tiny little micro business, like not a blip on any, big business radar, but my God, I'm paying my interns.
Yes, absolutely.
Because that keeps disadvantaged students from even having that hands-on experience in the first place. And then it's hard to get a job, yada, yada.
Yeah.
So I just think about how can I be a good friend and supportive for these groups and kind of share that. That's where this concept of passing the mic comes from.
Love that.
Back during Black Lives Matter, some of the more prominent social media influencers, a lot of white females were saying, you know what, I'm going to pass the mic to this Black influencer who really could use more support and following and does a great job. And they were sharing platforms. And I think that's great. We can do that with our work.
Absolutely. How can up and coming PR professionals include inclusion? That's fun to say, actually, include inclusion when entering the workforce.
Yeah, I think that thinking through. So in the book, I go through like the chapter on tailoring for multicultural audiences, and actually the chapter on relationships talk about all these things. And the reason I do that is because it just starts with how you treat others, quite simply. Right. So are you, when you start working in the workplace as you're up and coming, like, are you mentoring someone? Are you inviting them to come and hear you speak or asking their thoughts on a campaign? Are you shifting the dynamics in that group picture, like Gini mentioned, right? A lot of us have the ability to do so. We just either don't think we do or, are too scared to try. And I think if we're pushing those boundaries respectfully, we can absolutely do that from any level.
And I think to having the confidence to be able to say no when it's not right. Like the former client I mentioned, they were a really good client. They paid us a lot of money. And I could not, for the life of me, get through to the CEO. Like he really believed that his committee of 5 white men was representative of his organization, when in fact it was not. And I worked really hard to get him to change that things and he wouldn't. So we finally had a discussion internally and decided as a team, this was not somebody we wanted to continue to work with because it's representative of us too in our work, right? So I think having the confidence to be able to stand up and say no to your boss or to your supervisor or to an organization when it doesn't represent the work or the culture that you want to belong to.
Yeah. And, I made a lot of, there's some stories in the book. So each chapter opens up with some kind of story or inside the chapter, like they're not boring case studies. They're real life, like this thing happened and this is what happened about it. Not all bad. Names have been changed if they were negative, right? Because I'm in PR. But the point is, I walked away from lucrative opportunities of all kinds.
Yep.
And even good, I think connectors who could really be helpful to me in my career when I feel like they don't align with what I want my personal brand to be, right? They're living a complicated life or doing some things personally that lead into the professional space, or you're going to be in that position as a PR pro, I think, when you can't manage above, like your CEO like goes out and drinks too much and tweets too much and has too many affairs and or whatever level that is. And I say, like, sometimes you can help be the change and through your influence, right? You can maybe change them. Sometimes you just need to make a change because it's also going to tie and connect with you. And I don't want to be that pro that's going to go down with the ship where I told him, hey, this is wrong. This is not set up right. It's sinking. Like I would have been the PR pro on the Titanic. Like, I'm not getting on there. And also, I'm letting everyone know they shouldn't. So
I'm not getting. I'm going to stand out there with a sign. Do not
That's
get
right.
on this ship.
do not get on the ship. Yeah, this is my spirit animal, Jiminy Cricket. So always let your conscience be your guide.
Love
And
it. That's exactly right. Your gut is always right. Follow it.
right. And if Pinocchio can't behave, just go ahead and go. So
Well, Linda says, I really liked MVW as soon as I met her and attended her session at the Icon. She's so real and approachable. So I will leave everyone with that.
thank you, Linda. And thank you all so very much. And it's just such an honor to have these conversations, have them with you. And of course, Gini, all the thanks in the world for supporting this kind of conversation and the progression. And yeah, Linda, like maybe we're going to integrate these DEI tactics with the PESO model. There are some models in the book where I show how it integrates with PR. So sometimes that Venn diagram, Gini, just
I know, I'm telling you.
aha moments.
It's
Everyone.
all people need.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I can share different points of view on things. And of course, the book has a ton of points of view because that's what those are supposed to be. And of course, Jeannie's got so many great tips on Spin Sucks the blog in her community. I'm enjoying dancing around in there and meeting some new friends. And as well as the podcast, Jeannie, I like to hear your advice. And it's a great way to kind of get, we talk a lot about mentoring. We're not always going to get that one-on-one mentoring, but we can get it from special sources like that, from books and webinars and podcasts and reading. So I love all that.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, I've been getting questions and inquiries about people wanting to support the show. If you're interested in underwriting an episode or an entire season, email me at melissa@smarttalkseries.com. We love diving deep into communication topics to elevate our industry practice. If you'd like to go deeper, you can work with me as a trainer, consultant, or hire my firm, MVW Communications, for strategic communication planning or PR strategy services. In case you missed it, Smart Talk, Public Relations Essentials All Pros Should Know is out. You can buy your print copy or audiobook copy to get my advice, tips, and tools about all things public relations. Available on Amazon or get an autographed copy at mvw360.com/book. Grab your copy and please leave us a review. It will mean the world to me and helps more aspiring or working professionals find us. And as always, think smart and communicate smart. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Smart Talk series. If you learned something or enjoyed our conversation, share it on social media or send to a friend. To learn more about this and other communication topics, visit mvw360.com. That's mvw360.com.